Let me ask you, you have a lot in common with Bob Dole. I mean, you're obviously both from farm states. You're conservatives, but I would say pragmatic conservatives. You both served in the House before you served in the Senate. What's the difference between the House and the Senate?
For me, when I was, and Bob Dole too, when he was in the House, he was always in the minority. I was in the minority. We never expected to be in the majority, but all of a sudden, 1981, he was chairman of the Finance Committee. I was in the majority. I was able to be chairman of subcommittees, and nobody anticipated that. But the difference between the House and Senate is roughly 2 or 3 things, maybe 4 things. One, being in, at least when we came here, being in the majority as opposed to being in the minority. Number 2, you got to beg for opportunities to speak in the House, and you only get 2 or 3 minutes to speak, and you can't just automatically get the floor and keep it as long as you want to. In the Senate, anything you want to say for as long as you want to say it, under most circumstances, you've got an opportunity to just be a force there from the standpoint of speeches, almost because of the lack of rule or germaneness in most cases. You can offer anything you want to, so you got an opportunity to have a forum for any cause you want, an opportunity to bring any legislative issue before you, you got an opportunity to. But I think the most important thing is it's a smaller body, and you actually know everybody. In the House of Representatives, I'd be reading the name in the newspaper and say, well, who is that? See, and even in my own party sometimes, you really get acquainted with your colleagues, and public doesn't view, they think everything's political in Washington. They don't recognize the cordiality of one senator towards the other. Even for people that disagree a lot, even for people that don't talk to each other a lot, there's still respect for each other, I believe, that I don't think you are able to develop in the House of Representatives, even if you wanted to, say, particularly with everybody, I think. So I think being in a majority, a 6-year, another thing is a 6-year term. You got a long view. In the House of Representatives, you're spending all your time running for re-election.
You spend too much time raising money?
Now, not when I started, I don't think.
And you started when?
1979 to run for the Senate. I was elected to the House in 74. But in 1979 and 80, I spent a lot of time raising money, but I didn't spend 6 years raising money. Now you spend at least 4 out of 6 years raising money.
So you came into the Senate as part of that Reagan tidal wave.
Yeah, but I want to remind you, I got 100,000 more votes in Iowa than Reagan got.
Okay.
It wasn't his coattails that got me elected.
Understood.
Yeah.
But you come in at the same time when Dole and Howard Baker and all these folks who were also in the minority suddenly find themselves in the majority.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I suppose for me, not being in the Senate until that very day of the election, it wasn't so much different, but for the people that had been here and been in a minority for 24 years, 26 years, 24 years I guess it was almost a shock, you know. I mean, didn't realize they had a chance of being. They probably felt they had a chance to pick up. And it was almost, you know, like we got a tiger by the tail. What do we do? You know, what do we do? But I think we did pretty well in the 6 years we were in the majority during that period of time. I think people like Howard Baker and Bob Dole, you know, Howard Baker's leader, Bob Dole's chairman of the Finance Committee, and 4 years later, Bob Dole's leader. I think that they had a handle on the institution. They had a good working relationship with other people. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't so much a shock to the Republicans as it was to the Democrats. I remember the first meeting of the Finance Committee. Bob Dole was chairman, and you know Russell Long was former chairman. And you know how they call the roll? They call all the Republicans except the chairman. Then they call all the Democrats. And just as soon as Russell Long responded to Russell Long on a yay or nay, and then they immediately called Mr. Chairman, and Russell Long said aye, because he'd been chairman for 18 years, and everybody roared, you know. He was so used to responding to Mr. Chairman.
Tell us what the Finance Committee did in those days.
Well, subject matter, the very same thing they do today. All tax issues, all trade issues, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, unemployment compensation, let's see, jurisdiction over IRS, HHS, some of Commerce, all of Treasury. In those days, tax issues were very important. Cutting the marginal tax rate, indexing the tax code, which is, or the income tax rates are indexed now, so you don't have inflation impact, wage inflation impact. Phantom taxation, I guess you'd call it, you know. Trade was significant from the standpoint of being 30 years into the free trade regime of the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trades, now called the World Trade Organization. A lot of trade issues. Not so much Medicare, Medicaid. An awful lot to do, though, with Social Security, because in 1982, 83, there was a negative cash flow. The only time in the history of Social Security thus far there was a negative cash flow. We were pouring general fund money into it, so we had to reform Social Security. But it wasn't done so much within committee. You know, Reagan set up a commission made up of people like Bob Dole and Greenspan and Long and I suppose Moynihan, people like that. I'm not sure exactly who was on it, but they came to a bipartisan compromise. You know, the Speaker of the House was involved in it. It was kind of a Bob Dole, Reagan, I can't think the Speaker's name.
Oh, Tip O'Neill.
Tip O'Neill. Sure. Thank you for reminding me. Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan got Social Security straightened out. So in a couple of years, it was having a positive cash flow again.
Let me ask you, because of course at the beginning, 81, you had the whole Reagan economic program with, I guess in the end it was a 25% tax cut, some significant, relatively significant spending cuts and other measures as well. Now, Bob Dole was not a supply side conservative. I'm not sure where you fit in that picture, and yet he was a very good soldier. How did that happen, and what were his strengths in terms of making something like that happen?
Bob Dole's strengths was, number one, he had what it takes to make the Senate work, working across party lines, similar to what Baucus and I do now. He was respected because he was a war hero. I think that helped more. I don't think he'd want to admit that. I think it was, you know, but I think it's a fact of life. I think he's still respected for that reason, more than maybe even being a darn good senator. You know, I mean, he really demonstrated what World War II was all about for a lot of people. His strength was basically knowing the legislative process very well, working across lines, working hard. I mean, when Bob Dole wasn't traveling someplace on a Saturday, he had his whole staff in his Kansas office here in the Hart Building working at least part of the day, and maybe all day for all I know. He had the ability to attract outstanding staff. But I think the most important thing was to just have the legislative process work. And the art of compromise.
And how does it work? I think so many Americans have almost no idea about how things actually function up here, including when they succeed.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it behind closed doors in the middle of the night in a conference committee? What is it what chemistry happens, and what can a successful leader do to make that happen?
Well, there might be a difference in the type of closed doors, in the sense that maybe when you're just developing a bill, it's a little bit different environment than if you might be sitting in those same environments late at night in a conference between the House and the Senate when things have moved along to a point where you just about got a product and make the few last compromises to get something done. But I think I'd rather start with, first of all, there's a difference between the House and Senate in the sense that in the House today and forever, I believe, you know, a bipartisan majority, a Republican majority, or a Democrat majority, as long as they stick together and get anything done they want to get done. Whereas in the Senate, with the rare exceptions, and maybe there's never been a time in the Senate, because when you used to have Southern Democrats, I'm not sure that, even though the Democrats maybe had 65 to 70 members, that they got done what the National Democratic Party would have liked to have done. But with the exception of that, I think throughout the history of the United States Senate, you got to remember, nothing gets done that's not somewhat bipartisan because of the filibuster and the supermajority to stop the filibuster. And you got to remember that the United States Senate is the only political institution where minority views are protected. And they're protected through the no limit on debate, the supermajority. So when you have today 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats, or even when you had 55 Republicans last time, 45 Democrats, and Republicans don't always stick together, I always figured you had to have at least a dozen Democrats on your side to get anything done. So the Senate's a little bit different than the House, but in the Senate, it's a little bit like, do the members that have to forge a compromise realize you have to have a bipartisan compromise? I think probably 60, 75% of the senators know that. Do they always practice it? No, they don't always practice it, but they know that. And so you start out as, right now, Senator Baucus and I, for instance, working on the children's health insurance program. He gives me a call and says, you know, can we sit down and see what we can work out, just like we did 3 years ago on prescription drugs for Medicare, as an example. So, you know, it takes, but there's got to be a certain amount of chemistry between a couple people for that to happen. And then,
Trust.
what?
And trust.
Yeah, trust. But he carries a burden that I also carry, that you got 50 other members in his party, 48 other people in my party, and so you just can't do what Chuck Grassley and Baucus want to do. We got to look over our shoulders. You can't be a leader if you don't have some followers. So you got to look at your caucus and say, what can I do to sell this to maybe at least half of my caucus, and if Grassley can sell it to half of his caucus, you know, you got a majority to move. But, so we have to be cautious as we do it. But what does it is, in other words, what gets done behind closed doors is the opportunity to give and take. See?
And presumably, I've been told he has almost a sixth sense about just when to strike a deal, just when someone might be ready to nudge across the finish line. I mean, it's almost a psychological game of or instinct at work. Is it that?
You have to come to the conclusion that there's a timeline that you got to get things done, and probably 90% of what needs to get done is in the last 10% of the time. And Bob Dole sensed when the deadline was, and you know, and there's maybe some tactics to waiting, because it makes people, you know, what the old saying, cut or fish bait. Is that what you?
Yeah, I think. And presumably, you also have to work with people you don't much like. Yeah. I mean, just the nature of the game. You can't let that get in the way of your effectiveness.
Now, I can't speak for Bob Dole on this, but I can speak for myself that, you know, I may like some senators a little bit more than other senators, but I don't know of a single senator that I dislike. Now, maybe some people dislike me. I don't want to know it, see. So I don't really operate that way. I doubt if Bob Dole did. I don't know him. I mean, I know him well, but I don't know him that initial, you know. I remember one time that this is years ago. Senator Kennedy and I talk to each other all the time now, but in my early years in the Senate, didn't used to talk to him much, and I'd say, "Hi, Ted," or something, or say, "Hi, and I said, and Bob Dole was by one time when I said that, and Kennedy walked right by, and I said, "You know, he didn't even recognize me," or not recognize, he didn't respond to me. And Bob Dole says, "You know, he's always got a lot of things on his mind." See, I probably wouldn't appreciate that unless Bob Dole had said that about Senator Kennedy. He knew Senator Kennedy a lot better than I did. See, so let's get back to what was your question that I was responding to about Bob Dole and the sixth sense.
Yeah, I mean, what strengths he brought.
Yeah, you know, I doubt if Bob Dole would say he had a sixth sense.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's just something that comes natural, and I think maybe more from Midwesterners because they tend to be more transparent. I would call Bob Dole a transparent person. I don't know whether, except, you know, he was very much a person that maybe you didn't know what he was thinking all the time, but he wasn't somebody that was trying to pull a fast one on you, see? And so there's a lot of trust there.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether he'd say he had a sixth sense, but just the experience he had as a legislator, and probably his background as being transparent in the Midwest, background of understanding people that have had to struggle economically to get along.
Would you say there's a little bit of populism?
Oh, without a doubt.
In Bob Dole?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, you know, he was, think of his efforts with food stamps. Think of his efforts towards hospice as an example. Medicaid. He probably didn't, you know, he wasn't here when the Medicaid bill, well, he was here when the Medicaid bill was written. I don't know about his activity in that, but he did not forget his roots. And probably part of that was related to the fact that as he stayed in the Senate, he never accumulated, as far as I know, he didn't accumulate wealth until after he got out of the Senate. And I'm not, and so I think that his personal demeanor, based on his bringing up and not having a lot other than salary and things like that, you know, I think kept him very humble. He was and still is a humble person.
Yeah, I would say he's never forgotten where he comes from.
Yeah.
Were you one of
He would still be telling you about the people in Russell, Kansas, taking up that collection in that cigar box.
Yeah.
See.
The 81 tax bill, I guess you all got into a bidding war with the Democrats, and I know once it was passed, that Dole at least thought maybe we'd gone too far in terms of giving away revenue. And of course there was the follow-up, TEFRA in '82, which was a very controversial piece of legislation. Where were you on all of that?
The only thing I remember about the tax bill of '81 is I was an advocate along with Senator Armstrong with indexing the tax rates, so we didn't have the phantom taxation coming in from inflation. Probably not so much problems with Dole, but problems with Reagan. Now, can you believe it? Reagan didn't want to do that. Armstrong and I went down, and I guess we went down and tell Reagan we was going to do it. And he tried to talk us. He says you ought to do that a little bit later. Now, maybe Bob Dole was of the same opinion, but I don't know that. But we got indexing in, and it's still there. And I believe that the tax bill of '81 went further than it did because of the movement of Kemp and Roth.
Yes.
You know, for the 2 years, maybe 3 years before that. So I think you got to look at not just Bob Dole in the '81 tax bill. You got to see the movement of Kemp Roth prior to that. Didn't include indexing. It was almost, I don't know whether Bob Dole would have had this opinion, and I'm not sure that I was a Kemp Roth person, but with the election turned out the way it was, I think it was seen as a opportunity. And I think Bob Dole, being chairman of the committee, felt taxes, something needed to be done on taxes, and you obviously had the President of the United States on your side. So it didn't boil down to how much to do, but the extent to getting something done that Republicans had stood for a long period of time. See? Now, when it comes to TEFRA, that's the name of the 82 bill, I believe, TEFRA. I believe that the tax bill of I think she's going to get it. I don't.
Take it off the hook.
Okay. When it comes to the tax bill of 82 and I better start over again. When it comes to the tax bill of 81 and the loss of revenue, yeah, it was seen that too much was done maybe for business and corporations in the 81 tax bill, but also we had the tremendous recession that nobody anticipated. Eventually, I think 12% unemployment for a short period of time. And we would have had a decline in income regardless, and I'm not so sure but what the tax bill of 81 didn't get more blame. But we were still in this frame of mind that you lower tax rates, you cut income into the federal treasury, and you raise tax rates and you bring in more money. Well, now here we are in 2007. We've got the history of 2004, 5, 6, and 7. We got Greenspan telling us that we have that the tax bill of 2001 and 2003 revitalized the economy, created 7 and 8/10 million new jobs, got $750 million more coming into the federal treasury the last 3 years than what we did, what we anticipated we might have at this point, all related to the fact that tax policy has good consequences. See, now there's liberals around here you can't convince that of, and I believe that today. I'm not sure I believe that in 81. See, and I'm sure that Bob Dole believed that his tax bill cut revenue and we need to do something about it. I'm not sure now, on hindsight, that I believe that. I don't know whether Bob Dole still believes that today, but tax policy does change behavior, and behavior's got something to do with the economy.
Sure.
And but it was blamed for it, and that's why we had TEFRA. Now there were some bad policies in 81 that have, I don't know the exact names of them, but we would allow corporations, there was a term that we used for it, we would allow corporations who didn't have the benefit of, didn't have income enough to claim a investment tax credit, to buy the investment tax credit from somebody else. People learned how to game the system. And I think we were correcting not so much the TEFRA to bring in more revenue as to correct obvious bad tax policy we passed. You want the marketplace to make most of these decisions. We lower tax rates because 137 million taxpayers like you making individual decisions on how you're going to do with that extra money is going to do more economic good than 535 of us in the Congress bringing in that revenue, deciding how to distribute it. See?
Did you, I assume, you supported Dole's candidacy for majority leader?
Yes.
He ran in 84?
Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah.
He won by one vote, didn't he?
He won by one vote.
Yeah.
Were you surprised that he won? Or, because I've talked to other people who frankly were surprised that he won.
I was surprised, yeah.
I think Ted Stevens was the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
He lost. And Ted was whipped, so it was a natural opportunity for him to go up. Yeah.
What are the factors that enter into an election like that? I assume it's not just ideology.
Okay. Well, I don't know, one of the factors that entered into it was why did Packwood back Bob Dole? Because Packwood was going to be chairman of the Finance Committee if Bob Dole got out of the way. You know, I can only speak for myself. Bob Dole, in the 4 years that I was a freshman member of the Finance Committee, treated me like a brother. You know, didn't always agree with me. Maybe didn't always you know, support what I wanted to do, but I know times that I felt I wasn't getting a fair shake, and probably came for the lack of fair shake was coming from staff doing what they wanted to do as opposed to what Bob Dole wanted to do. So I go talk to Bob Dole and tell him what the problems is, and he's, you know, he would see that I got justice.
You've seen several people do the job of majority leader. You'd seen Howard Baker, and then you saw Bob Dole. How did they differ?
How do they differ? I think that Howard Baker was more of a leader that was very open with people, and you knew where he stood. And Bob Dole was more of a loner as a leader, I believe. I believe that Bob Dole was a better leader, but I think he did stuff more through staff than he did personally. And I believe Howard Baker would have worked more senator to get things done. You know, I may not be fair to Bob Dole by saying that, because you're asking me to think back,
Well,
you know, at least when he started,
Yeah.
that would be 20 years ago, you know.
it's said to be one of the hardest jobs in Washington.
Yeah,
What makes it
well,
hard?
because you're herding cats. You know, I mean, it's not like the United States. It's not like the House of Representatives where it's run from the top down. It's run from the bottom up, you know. Friss expresses it better than anybody else, you know. He compared it to a cemetery. Well, I forget that comparison, but that's the best, if I could think of that, it'd be the best way to demonstrate the Senate of what it is, you know. But, you know, it's probably Mansfield is probably the reason that the Senate is so hard to operate, because Mansfield, I'm told, I didn't serve with him, but I'm told that he had the view that every senator is an individual senator, and every senator ought to have a chance to offer his amendment, to say what he wants to say. You don't push him around, you know, just the opposite of Lyndon Johnson, as you read about Lyndon Johnson and the Master of the Senate, you know. And Bob Dole and, you know, Howard Baker and other people kind of inherited that new Senate. And that Senate's still that way today, you know.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because I'm going to ask you if you sensed in your time in Congress changes in terms of less party loyalty, that television and getting on television trumps a lot of other things, that a lot of time is spent fundraising, that it's a more individualistic body and a less collegial.
I think the airplane's responsible for that. We go home every weekend. You read Master of the Senate, and you read about Mrs. Johnson and cooking for people on Sunday night, other senators coming over. I don't know, except for 4 or 5 times in 27 years I've been in the Senate, I've been in another senator's home.
Really?
See, I have reservations to get out of here the first airplane after the last vote on Thursday or Friday, and I come back usually just before we vote on Monday or Tuesday, see. So, because I want to be home with my constituents. I've got 2 jobs, one in Washington legislating, got another job in Iowa making the process of representative government work. I got to get out there and talk to Iowans. And airplane makes that possible. But the extent to which we got an airplane and Chuck Grassley and every other senator goes home almost every weekend, there's less social relationships developing. And I think it does make for a harsher climate. But I still think that it's not as partisan or it's not as impersonal as people believe, because you always hear about controversy on the television, See.
Let me ask you a broad question. Whether, once you got here, got to know Dole, whether there was anything about him that surprised you. I mean, compared with the public image, the public persona that he had. Is there something about Dole that you wished people generally could experience the way that you and your colleagues experienced on a regular basis?
Yeah, I wish that people knew the impact that people who went out of their way for him after he was injured in World War II, that made an impact on him. Some of the people he knew and some people he didn't know. And some people were in Russell, Kansas, and some people were someplace else. Or it's a doctor in Chicago. These people that stood by Bob Dole and brought him to the point where he could be a congressman and a senator had a lasting impact on his life, and I can't prove it, but I think they made a big difference to how he saw his role as a senator, and probably had a great deal to do with a lot of decisions he made, even though I could not point to them, but that's what I believe. See.
Interesting. In '88, of course, he wins the Iowa caucus, no doubt with considerable help from you. Tell me about that campaign, and was the vice president in some ways operating that at a disadvantage compared to 1980 when George Bush didn't have an entourage and he could travel almost one-on-one, retail politicking? And by '88, of course, he's in this cocoon. Was that something that hurt him on balance? Why did the vice president of the United States come in third in the balloting in Iowa? What state did he win?
Well, by then, as you know from the result of the '86 election, and at the time that Reagan was not so popular. Now, just before he left the presidency, I think he gained back some of that. But during the '86 and into '87, Reagan did not have very good approval ratings. And I think that hurt Bush. But the most important thing is that Bob Dole was like Iowans. I think that the personal attachment, regardless of the vice president, the personal attachment of people, they felt that Bob Dole was one of them. And I think that's why he won.
It went beyond agriculture. That obviously was a factor, but culturally, is it affinity?
Yeah, but I think that agriculture and ethanol and what he had done over a period of years, we felt like he was almost president of Iowa. See? Yeah.
How has conservatism changed in the time that you've been in Congress? Because clearly Dole was a more traditional kind of economic conservative. And you had a sense, particularly in '96, that he was kind of chasing this caboose, the social conservatism, and not terribly convincingly in some ways. That tension within the party.
That is a difference. I think the Republican Party and conservatism, well, I think I better say the Republican Party, not conservatism. It's moved from strictly economic conservatism to social conservatism. Now at the point, now in 2007, I'm saying this, I'm not so sure, but what economic conservatism isn't gaining some ground now. But for instance, in this caucus season in Iowa, because I think a lot of Republicans think Hillary Clinton's going to be the nominee. I have not seen the litmus test type people who in 76, 80, 88, 92, 96, and 2000 were looking at this candidate or this candidate, which one's the purest on abortion, which one's the purest on gay rights, but mostly it was abortion, I believe, throughout that period of time. They're not questioning Giuliani right now that has a different view, and they're not questioning Romney changing his mind. I think that's an opportunity for ascendancy of economic conservatism to come back. But Bob Dole's was economic conservatism, and I don't think he always felt comfortable talking about abortion as an example, or gay rights as an example.
I've wondered, because I had this conversation with President Ford, and they were sort of the same generation, pretty much, same kind of background, and there was sort of this, what I call, leave me alone conservatism, which is, it's none of my business conservatism, that there are issues that are so personal, so intimate, that it's really not something the government should be legislating.
And I can talk freely about those things, but I'd rather talk about economic conservatism myself. So I'm kind of, I'm 10 years younger than Bob Dole, but I still, that's kind of where I'm coming from, although I have a perfect pro-life voting record as an example.
The caucus, where were you on? Do you remember
with Bob
in 88
Dole.
caucus night? Were you with the senator?
I was with the senator, and we headed the next morning for New Hampshire, and I went over to New Hampshire for
And what was his mood?
I think he expected to win.
In Iowa.
So, and it was obviously a good mood, and he was ready to move on. And he went into New Hampshire. Of course, he didn't win. I don't think he won New Hampshire.
Right.
He went into New Hampshire, I think, expecting a big lift, and probably did give him a lift, but it didn't materialize in the end the way he wanted it to. But it was a joyful thing.
Were you surprised that Pat Robertson had come in second?
Yeah, I was, that would be the height of people who were making decisions on litmus test type that I was trying to describe to you,
he still refers to himself as the president of Iowa. I mean, Iowa obviously has a very special place in his heart.
Yeah, you bet.
He thought, it's funny, Dick Worthwood, his pollster, told him on that Friday after the caucuses, he got the lift. Worthwood was telling him, you're going to win New Hampshire. And Dole wasn't so sure. And then over the weekend it slipped away. Governor Sununu's organization came into the picture. They put a new television spot on, and then it was over. In '96, well, was there any doubt in your mind that he would run again? I mean, in '96?
Yeah, I believe there was. Let's see. I'm just trying to think about '96. No, I'd have to go back. I don't think there was any doubt that he was getting ready to run again.
Notwithstanding his age, that wasn't
I suppose that there was some feeling because of his age he shouldn't run. But at that point, he wasn't. He would have been just a little older than Reagan was when he was elected, as I recall. See.
Let me backtrack for just a minute, because the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, what was his role? Of course, the Senate had a historic debate, and a very close vote. Like there was 52-48 authorizing the use of force.
And let me tell you what, I was one of two Republicans along with Hatfield that voted against going to war that time. And he knew it was uncomfortable for me. And he came to me and he says something about, do you want to talk to the president? And I said no. He said, I didn't think you wanted to, and he left me alone.
Really?
Yeah, he respected my view.
That's revealing.
Yeah.
because there was an incident later on, I remember when Senator Hatfield, on the balanced budget amendment, Senator Hatfield would have been the 60th vote and actually offered to resign.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's a matter of conscience. And
Yeah.
were you surprised, did he discuss with you at all the strategy that led to his resigning from the Senate in '96 in order to pursue the campaign?
He didn't discuss it to me until almost the last week. And about all he said was, I judged it from this standpoint: resign because he's just got to devote full-time to the campaign. I guess I was a little surprised because I observed him during 80 and 88, and then in 96, went up till that time. He had a 95% attendance record at the United States Senate. And, you know, people, I think, jokingly asked me if I'd ever run for president, because I don't think they're serious when they say that. And I said, no, I came to the conclusion, no, because I followed Bob Dole around. And Bob Dole could be a good senator, and he could be a good presidential candidate. And I came to the conclusion I couldn't do both. And I wasn't going to resign from the United States Senate to run for president, see? And I like being a senator. And he could do it, but I couldn't do it, and I don't think too many people can do it. In fact, you know, John Kerry, and I'll bet most of the candidates this time are around here. Well, even John McCain has missed 40 or 60% of the vote, and a lot of people missed a lot of votes.
Why do you think Dole was able to do it?
Because Bob Dole was committed to the Senate, he was committed to run for president, and he's a workaholic. I mean, I don't know that he had any home life. You know, I mean, he was probably bored sitting around Watergate. See?
Do you remember?
I assume he was bored. I don't know for sure.
Do you have a theory, you know, there is this notion out there that marrying Elizabeth is what softened him, you know, that it produced a new Bob Dole, and that seems a little simplistic.
I don't know that to be a fact, but it would do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know Elizabeth, she would tone you down pretty quickly, you know, see. I just came to Washington about the time they got married, so I don't know much. Well, I do too. I know the Bob Dole that was vice presidential candidate, and that's kind of the image you're talking about.
Yeah.
But no, I think that was a role of being a vice presidential candidate, see?
Yeah.
And, see, I've never known Bob Dole to be a harsh person. See, maybe he was, but he never was to me.
Yeah, that goes back to what I asked earlier, the discrepancy between the public image that some people had and the reality that you experienced.
You know, he had a long time to overcome that image that he got as a result of being the vice presidential candidate. But
were you, when he announced his decision to leave the Senate?
Yeah.
I know he spoke on the floor, and then I think there was also a private meeting with his Republican colleagues.
Yeah.
What do you remember from either or both? I assume it was a very emotional.
I just remember the announcement in 902 upstairs, I believe it was, in this building. And the large crowd of people that turned out. And probably, you know, in the years he's been in Congress, probably half of them were people that had been on his staff. Tremendous loyalty. But I think everybody felt that with the campaign coming up, it was the right thing to do. I think nobody really wanted to have that happen, but I think there was respect for it and acceptance of it. I don't remember anything specific about it. I may have been invited to the meeting prior to that in his office, but I don't know for sure. I don't remember for sure.
Presumably, it must have been a difficult thing for him to do. I mean, he loved this place. I
have no recollection of that being a difficult decision, but I think I think it would be softened though a little bit by the fact if you thought you were going to be president.
Yeah.
See.
Let me ask you a couple of quick things and I'll let you go. Is there anything he could have done differently in '96 do you think that would have changed the outcome of that election?
I don't think so. I think that it would have had to been a whole new Bob Dole, and you couldn't be a whole new Bob Dole. I mean, you were up against a guy that if you ever talk to President Clinton, you know, he leads you to believe you're the most important person in the world. I've had that sort of a conversation with him. And he had 4 years of a favorable press. You know, I mean, when you go to a tornado down in Arkansas, and he's got his arms around a woman and nobody else around except the wreckage of a tornado. Now, and the press puts it on the front page of every paper in America. And Bush did the same thing last week in Kansas, and barely knew he was there, you know. So when you have that sort of unfair treatment on the part of the press supporting one party versus the other, you know, how's Bob Dole going to have a chance? I mean, on a personality basis. I mean, it's very difficult when you don't get a fair treatment from the press. And Bob Dole couldn't be anybody but Bob Dole, and Chuck Grassley can't be anybody but Chuck Grassley. You try to be something else if you're from the Midwest, they know you're a fake.
Let me ask you, that's interesting, because I agree with you, it's the authenticity that was Dole's strong suit. People agree or disagree with him, they thought he was genuine. What they saw was real. And they respect that in a political culture that's so phony much of the time.
Yeah.
But what is it about being a senator? You know, in the 20th century, only 2 senators have gone directly from the Senate to the White House. Is there something about being a member of Congress that makes it harder for you to be elected president? Is there something about either the lingo that is spoken up here, or the way leadership is defined, or the...
Well, today it'd be because you're part of Washington, and at the grassroots of America in 2007, I think we have problems just because you're part of Washington. You're seen as part of the problem. But I think if you look at the whole history of it, it's that other senators and other congressmen are jealous of a person that's doing well, you know. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a Barack Obama today, when you can get 5,000 people in Iowa City, Iowa, to come just because you're Obama, you know? Every senator would like to be able to do that.
I mean, even, for example, just the language. You know, Dole had mastered this body, but he'd go outside the Beltway and speak in a kind of Capitol Hill shorthand that didn't necessarily communicate itself to
because
his audience.
He was still thinking he was talking to fellow senators.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. It's.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think he should be remembered?
Well, number one, as a war hero, an example of that perfect generation that I forget who wrote the book about
Tom Brokaw.
Tom Brokaw's book. What's the name of that book?
The Greatest Generation?
Yeah. I think Bob Dole, as a war hero, is part of that greatest generation that Brokaw talks about. Beyond that, remembered as a person that never forgot his roots, a person that worked day and night as a public official, a person who for the downtrodden always had them in his mind, regardless of the most powerful people he'd deal with and work with and probably respect too. None of that blinded him to the needs of the people that had needs, see. And I think that well, I don't know whether I can say much more.
No, it sounds to me like before they used the term, he was a compassionate conservative.
Yeah. A compassionate conservative because of his instincts and because of who he was, not as a political gimmick.
Well put. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I hope I've been helpful.
Oh, you've been huge.
Seems like we talk more about Chuck Grassley
No.
than we did about Bob Dole.
Listen, we appreciate it.